I want to speak today about the Eucharist. Whenever we see the multiplication of the loaves that happens in the life of Christ, that he did it on a few different occasions, our mind should always go to the Eucharist. And it's very subtle, but the same words that the Scriptures use to define what happened at the multiplication of the loaves is the same trajectory that you see at the Last Supper. So in today's Gospel it says, then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining. Took, gave thanks, distribute. And in the Last Supper, in every single account of the Last Supper, we see the same thing. Jesus took the bread, he gave thanks, broke it, and distributed it to the disciples. So the multiplication of the loaves was a foreshadowing of Christ giving the great gift, the ultimate gift of his own body in the Eucharist for our spiritual nourishment, multiplying it throughout the entire world, even to this day. One of the students asked me, actually just this last week, it was kind of a profound question. No one's ever asked me before, but they asked me, what do you think about at the moment when you consecrate Christ? The moment, this is my body, given up for you, hold that up, what's in your mind? And it's something I was actually thinking a lot about this last week, because the overwhelming experience I have every time I hold up the Eucharist is I thought I was losing everything and I have gained everything. Everything that is beautiful in my life, everything that is good, all the purpose, all the love, all the intimacy, everything I ever wanted in my life has come to me because of the Eucharist. Everything that is good because of the gift of Christ's body to me and the sacrifice that he asked of my body to give to him. And that's when I realized, and I was thinking about that question, everything in my life changed when I began to believe that Jesus Christ was really present in the Holy Eucharist. Before that, going to the church to pray didn't make much sense. But once I came to understand that Jesus Christ is as present in the Eucharist, in every tabernacle, as he was 2,000 years ago, well, son, if you are there, I want to be there. And all of a sudden, going to Mass actually meant something. It was no longer about just taking up my Bible and reading about someone who lived in the past. It was about going to Mass to experience the Last Supper, experience Calvary, and Christ giving of himself right here in the present moment. It was also the first time I had to start thinking about confession. One of the students told me, she goes, I never understood why you talk about confession, why Catholics talk about confession, until I started to believe in the Eucharist. Because for the first time, I came to the crossroads of how I was living my life, the sins I had on myself, and I knew I couldn't let Christ enter into my soul without going to confession first. I had that same movement happen in my life. And it was only because of my faith in the Holy Eucharist that one day, in his presence, I heard him calling me to be a priest. I remember very clearly, though, one time, it was earlier in my conversion, I wasn't really living the Catholic faith, and I was praying the rosary before the tabernacle in our convent up in Moscow. It's kind of an abandoned convent now, and I was praying the rosary before the tabernacle, and I was convicted of a sin that I wasn't willing to let go of still. I believed everything, I wanted to, follow Christ, but there was still a sin in my life that I didn't want to let go of. And I felt such a strong irritation in the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, because I knew that he was asking me to sacrifice this. And I swear, this is one of the first times I ever felt the wrath against God welling up within me of who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do with my own body. And I was so upset, I had to get up because all my impulse in that moment was to throw my rosary at the tabernacle and leave. That's what sin does. in every one of our hearts, deep down. The Eucharist is the gift of Christ's body to us. But it's not a free gift. It's a gift that demands the gift of our body in return. It's got a price upon it. That's what it means to take up the cross and follow Christ. But when we come to those crossroads in our life of choosing to protect my own body, to do my own thing, or to open myself up to His body and His word, there is a strong contradiction within every one of our hearts at that moment. But I can tell you that nothing has so much determined the trajectory of my life than when I came to believe in Jesus' presence in the Eucharist and strive to live faithful to that presence. You know, the ironic thing, it was actually the first one to really open my eyes to Christ's presence in the Eucharist was a former Satanist. Right? Speaking of Satanists, anyone else see what happened in Paris at the Olympics? No. Their public opening ceremony. There's a bunch of LGBTQ and drag queens holding a mock Last Supper. The opening ceremony. Right? This is on public live television all across the world in front of the dozens and dozens of people who still actually watch the Olympics. It was disgraceful, you know? But I thought I'd be really mad about it. And it was maybe as I spent a little more time in prayer, I didn't feel mad at all. I felt so much pity for them. You know, it's like, that's your life. That's you. That's an awfully big beard and a tight dress. You know, it just didn't fit. But when you not only realize that they don't accept the medicine of Christ, but they mock it, just like the Pharisees mocked Christ, that's the sin against the Holy Spirit. That's the unforgivable sin, because that means that there's nothing you will do to take that medicine. You know, because Satanists, they love two things. They love indulging the passions of the body. That's why sex and depravity and nudity are always associated with the diabolical. And secondly, they love mocking all things Catholic. Right? The devil only attacks what is sacred. It's called a black mass for a reason. You'll never see, no offense, but like a Protestant black service. That's just not a thing that is out there. I mean, what are you going to do? Read the Bible backwards or something? I don't know. You got to get creative. But the devil hates the Eucharist. He hates the Eucharist so much because they believe that He's actually there. They will spend hours on rituals of desecration of the Eucharist. This woman, I'm not going to spend too much time on her story. Her name is Betty Brennan. Betty Brennan, and you can watch her, listen to her testimony on YouTube on Former Satanist Becomes Catholic. So she gave this great talk about her own entering into Satanism and what got her back into the Catholic Church. But one thing that struck me when I first heard this, she said that the strongest Catholics that she had ever known in her life were Satanists. She never met another Catholic who believed more in the reality of Christ, of the Catholic Church, and of the sacraments, and especially of the Eucharist, than when she got into the Satanist crowd. She said one bona fide witch could look at 1,000 hosts, and if only one of those hosts was consecrated, she could pick it out immediately. They believed in Jesus, in His presence in the Eucharist, and they spent hours on rituals to desecrate the Holy Eucharist. And yet you look at most Catholics, we come forward and we're all here. We have such a wonderful flock here, but really you look at the average Catholic going to Mass, walking up, taking the host, consuming it really quick, not looking at your hand to see if you have anything on there, not thinking about anything before or after, and am I really prepared to receive Him, and not thanking Christ or entering into our hearts of the realization of what has taken place. It's the evil ones that are filled with this passionate intensity against God, while so many of us can take for granted the gift that we have in the Blessed Sacrament. But why, I really thought about this, why do they hate the Eucharist so much? Like, why would they pick the Last Supper to mock? Because it's a demand on our lives. It's a demand on our bodies. And it's a demand that they refuse to accept. And anyone who ever comes to the crossroads of their life to choose between following Jesus Christ and following their passions understands how hard that calling can be. That's why it's not like an us versus them. The only difference is those who are still following Christ are in the midst of the battle of every one of our own hearts against my will versus God's will. They just gave up the battle. The spirit of Satan is the refusal to enter into that sacrifice. You know, as Peter Kreeft, he once said about the pro-choice movement, he said, abortion is the Antichrist demonic parody of the Eucharist. Right? That is why it uses the same holy words, this is my body, with a blasphemously opposite meaning. Right? Jesus says, this is my body sacrificed for you. This is my body for me, and I sacrifice you for it. You know, one of my favorite priests, Father John Hardin, I read something from him, and it sounds very harsh. I've read it to you guys before, but it's something that comes back to my mind over and over again when I still see the culture of where we're going towards, especially what happened in the Olympics. He says, the reason why we have such a massive slaughter of the innocents through abortion is because in the super developed nations like our own, like France, we have become a fornicating society. We have become an adulterous society, a masturbating society, a homosexual society, and a contraceptive society. Unchaste people are selfish people, and they will not stop at the murder of an unborn child if it would be a burden to their indulgence and sexual pleasures. And every single one of us is in that fight in our lives. To live the Eucharist like Christ, of offering my body in union with His body. And that's what that sounds like a downer, right? It sounds pretty hard. That's what I think about every single time I celebrate the Mass. My own wrath that was in my heart when I felt God telling me I had to let go of sin in order to follow Him. I think about that all the time, that I could have walked away. And without His grace, I would have. And all of my life, and all the beauty of the fruit of where we are and what I've received, everything has flown from the Eucharist, from His sacrifice, and the sacrifice that He's asked me into in my own heart and priesthood. There's so much we could say with words, but I think, especially in light of this blasphemy that's taken place, and in union with so many of the bishops who have spoken about this and asked for reparation, I just want to end this homily. Let's invite you all to join me in saying the litany of reparation to the Blessed Sacrament for this sacrilege that took place, right? Maybe even any in my own heart, right? We're all guilty, every single one of us. We're not judging anybody, but we have to know the difference between the light and the darkness in this world. So if you want to bring out your phone, you just put out litany of reparation to the Blessed Sacrament. I just took it from the Knights of Columbus site, so it's right there. But if you don't want to do that, I'll lead you through and let you know the responses. But let us kneel for that at this time.